The champagne glasses clinked against each other as laughter filled the exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline. Harrison Mitchell, tech billionaire and owner of a $2.3 billion empire, stood at the head of the mahogany table, his chest puffed out with a kind of confidence that only unlimited wealth could buy. Tonight was supposed to be the night he closed the deal of a lifetime, a $500 million investment from Japan's most prestigious venture capital firm. What none of the guests knew was that in just a few minutes, a quiet woman refilling their water glasses would say something that would silence the entire room and change her life forever. Camille Washington moved gracefully between the tables, her black uniform pristine despite having worked a double shift. At 28, she had mastered the art of invisibility that came with being part of the help in Manhattan's elite circles. Her dark eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in everything while revealing nothing. The wealthy guests barely acknowledged her presence as she refilled their glasses and cleared their plates, which was exactly how they preferred it. What they didn't know was that behind her quiet demeanor was a brilliant mind fluent in 7 languages, including the Japanese that Harrison Mitchell was about to butcher in spectacular fashion. Camille had been working 3 jobs for the past 2 years, grinding through exhaustion and sacrifice to pay for her PhD in linguistics at Columbia University. Her tiny Brooklyn apartment, shared with her 6-year-old son, was a world away from the opulent restaurants where she served Manhattan's elite. Every night after tucking her son into bed, she would study by lamplight, dreaming of one day working as a cultural ambassador, building bridges between nations through the power of language and understanding. But dreams didn't pay rent, and scholarships didn't cover childcare, so here she was, invisible among the powerful serving drinks to people who wouldn't spare her a second glance. Harrison Mitchell had been preparing for this dinner for weeks, though his idea of preparation was having his assistant teach him a few basic Japanese phrases phonetically written on index cards. He had no real interest in Japanese culture or language. This was purely transactional. The investors, Hiroshi Tanaka and Akiko Yamamoto, represented the kind of old money and cultural prestige that even his billions couldn't buy. If he could impress them with his cultural sensitivity, the deal would be sealed, and his new artificial intelligence company would have the backing it needed to dominate the global market. As Camille moved around the table, she couldn't help but overhear Mitchell practicing his lines with his business advisor in the corner. Her stomach clenched as she listened to his pronunciation. It was not just wrong, it was offensively wrong. The phrases he thought were respectful greetings were actually crude insults, and his butchered pronunciation transformed what should have been honorific terms into something that would deeply offend any native speaker. She glanced at the Japanese investors who were engaged in polite conversation with other guests, unaware of the cultural disaster about to unfold. Camille knew she should stay quiet. Servers weren't supposed to speak unless directly addressed, and certainly not to correct their wealthy patrons. She needed this job desperately. The pay from the upscale restaurant was better than her other 2 positions combined, and losing it would mean falling behind on rent again. But as she watched Mitchell's arrogant smile and heard him practice calling Mrs. Yamamoto what essentially translated to "stupid cow," while thinking he was complimenting her beauty, Camille felt her professional composure cracking. The moment arrived with all the fanfare Mitchell could muster. He stood up, tapping his crystal glass with his gold-plated pen, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. The other guests, tech moguls, socialites, and venture capitalists, turned their expectant faces toward him, ready to witness what they assumed would be another display of Mitchell's business brilliance. Tanaka and Yamamoto straightened in their chairs, polite smiles fixed on their faces, prepared to be gracious about what they expected would be a charming, if clumsy, attempt at cultural appreciation. Mitchell began his speech with the confidence of a man who had never been told he was wrong about anything. His butchered Japanese rolled off his tongue like broken glass, each mispronounced syllable making Camille wince. He gestured grandly as he welcomed his honored guests, not realizing he had just called them foolish strangers. The other American guests nodded approvingly, impressed by what sounded to their untrained ears like sophisticated international business acumen. A few even whispered appreciatively about Mitchell's worldliness and cultural sensitivity. But Camille watched the Japanese investors' faces carefully, and she saw what the others missed. The subtle tightening around Tanaka's eyes, the way Yamamoto's smile became increasingly strained. When Mitchell attempted what he believed was a beautiful compliment about Yamamoto's wisdom and grace, he actually told her that her husband was a disgrace and her children were idiots. The insults kept flowing as Mitchell grew more confident, his voice rising with each phrase, completely oblivious to the cultural carnage he was creating. The breaking point came when Mitchell noticed Camille quietly refilling water glasses near the table. His eyes lit up with the cruel amusement of a man who enjoyed having an audience for his perceived superiority. He paused his butchered Japanese speech and gestured toward her with a smirk that made Camille's blood run cold. "I bet our server here doesn't even know I'm speaking Japanese," he announced to the table, his voice dripping with condescension. The guests chuckled, their laughter sharp and exclusionary. Some people just aren't exposed to this level of culture and education. The words hit Camille like physical blows, but she kept her face neutral, her hands steady as she continued her work. She had endured worse than this. Racism and classism were occupational hazards in her world. But Mitchell wasn't finished. Emboldened by the laughter of his audience, he continued his performance. "This is what real international business looks like," he proclaimed, launching back into his mangled Japanese. "You have to be able to operate on a global level, understand different cultures." As he spoke, he accidentally told Tanaka that his ancestors were dogs and his business was built on shame. Tanaka's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Camille saw the exact moment when the deal died in his eyes. Camille felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't just the personal humiliation. She had developed thick skin over years of dealing with entitled customers. It was watching this arrogant man destroy what should have been a moment of cultural bridge building, turning it into an international incident through his ignorance and refusing to acknowledge the intelligence and dignity of everyone he deemed beneath him. Her son's face flashed in her mind, and she thought about the lesson she was trying to teach him about standing up for what's right, about using his voice when he witnessed injustice. Her hands were shaking as she set down the water pitcher, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Excuse me, sir." The words cut through Mitchell's boisterous performance like a blade. The entire table fell silent, all eyes turning to the young black woman who had dared to interrupt the billionaire's show. Mitchell's face flushed red with irritation. "What now?" he snapped, clearly annoyed that the help had broken protocol by speaking without permission. "Can't you see I'm in the middle of an important presentation?" Camille took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to do would likely cost her the job she desperately needed. But she also knew she couldn't stand by and watch this cultural massacre continue. "I believe you meant to say this instead, sir," she said quietly, and then began speaking in perfectly fluent, beautifully pronounced Japanese. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and electric. Tanaka and Yamamoto's eyes widened in genuine amazement as Camille offered the proper welcome they should have received, her pronunciation flawless, her use of honorifics impeccable. She spoke with the kind of cultural sensitivity and linguistic precision that comes only from years of serious study, acknowledging their status with appropriate respect while expressing genuine pleasure at their presence. The other guests sat in stunned silence as this woman they had dismissed as invisible revealed herself to be more culturally sophisticated than their billionaire host. Camille continued speaking, gently correcting the most egregious errors Mitchell had made, explaining in Japanese that she had overheard his preparation and wanted to ensure that such honored guests received the respect they deserved. Mitchell's face had progressed from red to purple, his humiliation complete and public. The woman he had mocked for lacking culture and education had just demonstrated a mastery of Japanese language and customs that made his own attempt look like a child's scribbling. Worse, she had done it with grace and dignity, making it clear that her intervention was motivated by respect for the guests rather than malice toward him. "How dare you interrupt my presentation?" Mitchell exploded, his carefully crafted businessman persona crumbling to reveal the petty tyrant beneath. "You're just a server. You need to know your place and stay there." His voice carried across the restaurant, drawing stares from other diners who were witnessing what was clearly a man having a very public meltdown. The other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly seeing their host in a very different light. The charming, worldly businessman they thought they knew had been replaced by a red-faced bully screaming at a woman whose only crime was possessing the knowledge and courage he lacked. Several of them exchanged meaningful glances, already mentally distancing themselves from what was obviously about to become a public relations disaster. Camille stood perfectly still, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes but her dignity intact. "I was only trying to help, sir," she said quietly. "I apologize if I overstepped." Her composure in the face of his verbal assault made Mitchell's behavior look even more unhinged by contrast, and she knew it. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to be broken by it. But the evening was far from over. As Mitchell continued his tirade, Hiroshi Tanaka rose from his chair and approached Camille with the kind of quiet authority that comes from real power rather than wealth alone. His English was impeccable as he addressed her directly, completely ignoring the still sputtering Mitchell. "Miss, might I ask where you learned to speak Japanese so beautifully?" His tone was respectful, curious, treating her like the educated professional she actually was rather than the servant Mitchell saw. Camille explained about her linguistic studies at Columbia, her dissertation on cross-cultural business communication, her fluency in 7 languages. As she spoke, she watched Tanaka's expression change from curiosity to genuine interest to something that looked almost like excitement. Yamamoto joined the conversation, and soon the three of them were discussing linguistic nuances and cultural bridges, while Mitchell stood ignored and increasingly desperate to regain control of the situation. What Camille didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Tanaka was much more than just an investor. He was the CEO of Japan's largest technology consortium, and for the past 6 months, his company had been desperately searching for exactly the kind of person Camille had just revealed herself to be. They needed a cultural liaison who could navigate both American and Japanese business cultures, someone with the linguistic skills and cultural sensitivity to prevent the kind of international incidents that cost companies millions of dollars and years of relationship building. The position they had been trying to fill paid $300,000 a year plus full relocation assistance to Tokyo, with opportunities for advancement that could lead to executive-level positions within 5 years. They had interviewed dozens of candidates, all with impressive credentials on paper, but none with the combination of intellectual brilliance, cultural fluency, and moral courage they had just witnessed in this young woman. Mitchell, sensing that he was losing control of the situation entirely, tried desperately to salvage his reputation. He approached the group with forced joviality, suddenly claiming that he had always known there was something special about Camille, that he had been testing the Japanese investors' ability to recognize talent when they saw it. His transparent attempt to rewrite history fooled no one, least of all Tanaka, who looked at him with the kind of cold disdain reserved for those who reveal themselves to be fundamentally dishonest. "If that were true, Mr. Mitchell," Tanaka said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "then she would not be serving drinks at your table. She would be sitting at it as an equal." The words hung in the air like a judgment, and Mitchell's face went pale as he realized that his chance for investment had not just slipped away, it had been obliterated by his own arrogance and cruelty. Tanaka turned back to Camille, his manner warm and respectful. "Miss Washington, I would like to offer you a position with our company, effective immediately if you're interested. We have been searching for someone with exactly your qualifications for months." He handed her his business card, but not before writing something on the back of it. "This is my personal phone number. Please call me tomorrow morning so we can discuss the details." The restaurant fell silent as the magnitude of what had just happened sank in. The woman Mitchell had humiliated and dismissed was being offered what was obviously a significant position by one of the most powerful businessmen in Japan, while Mitchell himself stood there watching his own deal crumble into dust. 6 months later, Camille Washington was featured on the cover of International Business Weekly magazine as the bridge builder, how one woman's courage changed global corporate communication. The article detailed her rise from struggling graduate student to one of the most sought-after cultural consultants in the world, her groundbreaking work preventing miscommunications that could have cost companies billions of dollars, and her development of new protocols for international business relations. Her first major assignment had been particularly sweet, preventing a $2 billion cultural misunderstanding between an American tech company and their Japanese partners. The American company, it turned out, was owned by Mitchell's former business partner, who had been desperately trying to salvage relationships that Mitchell's arrogance had nearly destroyed. Camille's intervention saved not just the deal but the entire company from bankruptcy, while Mitchell watched from the sidelines, having been forced out by his own board of directors after the disastrous dinner became public knowledge. Camille's son was thriving in an international school in Tokyo, learning Japanese alongside his native English, growing up with a worldview that his mother had fought so hard to give him. They lived in a beautiful apartment overlooking Tokyo Bay, but more importantly, they lived with the security that comes from being valued for who you truly are rather than hidden because of others' prejudices. The story might have ended there, a simple tale of justice served and talent recognized. But the real twist came a year later, when Camille was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum about cultural intelligence in global business. As she stood at the podium looking out at an audience of world leaders and business titans, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Harrison Mitchell sat in the back row, no longer the confident billionaire who had humiliated her that night in Manhattan. His company had collapsed, his reputation was in ruins, and he was attending the forum not as a speaker but as someone desperately trying to rebuild his career from the ground up. When their eyes met, Camille felt no anger, no desire for revenge. Instead, she felt something closer to pity for a man who had possessed so much power and used it so poorly. During the question and answer session, Mitchell raised his hand. When called upon, he stood slowly, his voice lacking the arrogance that had once defined him. "Miss Washington," he said, "I want to publicly apologize for my behavior that night. You tried to help me save face, and I responded with cruelty. I've learned a lot about respect since then, mostly by experiencing what it feels like to lose it entirely." The room was silent, everyone understanding that they were witnessing something rare, a genuine moment of accountability from someone who had fallen from great heights. Camille nodded graciously, accepting his apology with the same dignity she had shown that night in the restaurant. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Mitchell," she replied. "I've learned that real strength isn't in having power over others, but in using whatever power we have to lift others up. Everyone deserves a second chance to do better." As Camille concluded her speech, her words resonated through the auditorium and beyond, carried by social media and news outlets around the world. Her message was simple but powerful. Respect costs nothing, but the price of disrespect can be everything. Behind every person we dismiss might be the very one who could change our life or save our future. True power isn't in wealth or status, it's in recognizing the worth in others and having the courage to treat them with dignity. The story of the billionaire who tried to impress guests in Japanese and the black woman who corrected him became more than just a viral video. It became a catalyst for conversations about respect, recognition, and the hidden brilliance that exists in every corner of our world, waiting only for someone brave enough to let it shine. And in a small apartment in Tokyo, a little boy fell asleep to his mother's voice, reading him stories in 3 different languages, growing up in a world where his mother had proven that courage and intelligence could triumph over arrogance and prejudice every single time.